Your father's account has been frozen by federal order, the IRS agent said, and those 7 words destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family in the span of a single phone call. We need to discuss why you attempted to withdraw $50,000 from a business account that technically doesn't exist anymore. I was sitting in my apartment in Portland, Oregon, on a Thursday night in March, holding my phone like it was made of something toxic. The apartment was the kind of place you rent when you're 26 and still figuring out what you're supposed to do with your life. Exposed brick industrial lighting, the kind of trendy neighborhood where rent costs more than my parents' first mortgage. I'd paid for it with money that wasn't mine, money I'd convinced myself I was just borrowing, money that was supposed to be sitting in my dad's business account like a safety net I could use whenever I needed. Except the safety net was already gone. I don't understand, I said, and I could hear the panic in my own voice, high and thin like a child's. My dad's account is frozen? Why? What are you talking about? Your father has been under investigation by the Internal Revenue Service for the past 14 months, the agent said. His name was Agent Holloway, and he spoke with the kind of careful precision that people use when they're delivering bad news to someone they suspect might not handle it well. We've been monitoring his business accounts, his personal accounts, and his financial transactions. He owes approximately $2.3 million in back taxes, penalties, and interest. When you attempted to withdraw $50,000 tonight, it triggered an alert in our system. Now I need you to tell me where that money was supposed to come from. I sat down on my couch, which was expensive and uncomfortable and purchased specifically because it looked good in photographs for Instagram. My legs had stopped working. My dad paid his taxes, I said, but even as the words came out of my mouth, I knew they weren't true. I didn't know anything about my dad's taxes. I didn't know anything about my dad's business, really. He owned a construction company that did residential renovation work throughout the Pacific Northwest. It was successful, or at least, it looked successful. He drove a Range Rover. He owned a vacation house in Bend. He paid for my apartment without asking questions about whether I could afford it myself. I'd never actually asked him how much money he made. I'd never asked him if he was really as wealthy as he seemed. I'd never asked him anything beyond, "Can you send me some money?" followed by, "How much can I borrow?" Mr. Reynolds, the agent said, and yes, that was my last name too. We were both Reynoldses, though that detail suddenly felt less like a connection and more like an indictment. I need you to understand what's happening here. Your father has been systematically underreporting income for at least 8 years. He's been paying contractors in cash to avoid filing requirements. He's been hiding revenue in offshore accounts. This is not a simple misunderstanding. This is tax evasion. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. I started, then stopped. I didn't what? I didn't know? Of course I didn't know. But not knowing wasn't an excuse. Not knowing was just another way of saying I hadn't cared enough to ask. When did your father tell you about the investigation? Agent Holloway asked. He didn't, I said. He didn't tell me anything. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could imagine the agent looking at his notes, reassessing his approach, deciding whether I was a criminal or just an idiot. Mr. Reynolds, I'm going to give you some advice, he said finally. And I want you to listen carefully. You need to tell your father to hire an attorney. A good one. Today. Not tomorrow. Today. And you need to stop attempting to access these accounts. Because what you did tonight, attempting to withdraw money from a frozen account, that could be interpreted as conspiracy or accessory after the fact, depending on whether a prosecutor is feeling generous. Then he hung up. I sat in my apartment for what felt like a very long time. The sun had gone down while I was on the phone, and the city lights were starting to come on outside my windows. The streets below were full of people, young people mostly, my age, people who seemed to know what they were doing, people who seemed like they had their lives figured out. I wondered if any of them had just discovered that their entire family was a lie. I called my dad. He didn't answer. I called again. Still nothing. I texted, "Call me. Urgent." Then I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, which was unusual. My mom usually let calls go to voicemail and called people back later, as if she had a schedule for these things. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, and I could hear the TV in the background. She was watching one of those true crime documentaries she liked, the kind that profile white-collar criminals and show how they destroyed their families. "Is everything okay? Where's Dad?" I asked. He's in the garage, she said. Why? What's wrong? You sound upset. I need to talk to him, I said. Right now. There was a pause. I could hear my mother processing the tone in my voice, deciding whether this was emergency level or just regular drama. Hold on, she said. Let me get him. 30 seconds of silence followed, which was 30 seconds too long. Then my father's voice came on the line, and he sounded tired. Not angry. Just tired. Hey, buddy, he said. What's going on? The IRS called me, I said. An agent. He said your account is frozen. He said you owe $2.3 million. He said you've been under investigation for 14 months. Is that true? Another pause. This one was longer. In the background, I could hear my mother's voice, asking what was happening, why the IRS was calling, what had Dad done. And in that pause, before my father said anything, I understood. He'd known. He'd known the whole time. He'd known when he was paying for my apartment. He'd known when he was lending me money whenever I asked for it. He'd known that his business account was frozen, that his assets were being monitored, that his freedom might actually be in jeopardy. He just hadn't told me. Can we talk about this in person? My dad said finally. Not over the phone. When can you come home? The thing about growing up wealthy is that you don't realize you wealthy until you not anymore. You think everyone's parents pay for their apartment. You think everyone's parents hand them credit cards and say, don't worry about it. You think everyone's college tuition gets paid for without them ever having to take out loans. And then you go to college with kids whose parents do things like make them get jobs and understand the value of money, and you realize you've been living in a completely different world. I'd come back to Seattle after college with a degree in business administration and absolutely no idea what to do with it. My dad had offered me a job at his construction company, something in the office, but that felt like admitting defeat. I was supposed to do something better, something that didn't require me to literally follow in his footsteps. So instead, I'd moved to Portland and taken a job at a startup that was supposed to be the next big thing in social media optimization. They paid me $45,000 a year, which was apparently not enough to live in Portland, even though I'd thought it was a lot of money. My dad had paid the difference. Not reluctantly. Not with caveats or conditions. He just paid it. When I said my rent was $2,200 a month and I was struggling, he'd said, I'll cover the difference, and that was the end of the conversation. This happened throughout my 20s. When I wanted to buy a car, my dad had co-signed a loan. When I wanted to take a vacation, my dad had said, just tell me when, and appeared with cash. When my startup went under and I was unemployed for 3 months, my dad had paid all my bills without mentioning it. He never asked for anything in return. He never even mentioned that he was helping me. He just quietly, consistently, made sure that I never had to experience actual consequences. I'd interpreted this as generosity. I'd interpreted it as love. I'd never interpreted it as enabling. I'd never thought about where the money was coming from, or whether it was actually his to give. The $50,000 I'd tried to withdraw was supposed to pay for a business venture I was starting. A supplement company. I'd been doing research, reading articles online, watching YouTube videos from entrepreneurs who made millions, and I'd become convinced that I could do it too. My friends, the ones I'd been hanging out with more frequently, the ones who also seemed to have money that appeared from nowhere, had encouraged the idea. Your dad's loaded, one of them had said, a guy named Brandon who worked in cryptocurrency and spoke with the kind of confidence that comes from having gotten very lucky once. He won't even notice 50 grand. Just take it. He probably has way more than he actually uses. So I had. On a Thursday night, I'd logged into the online banking portal using the information my dad had given me years ago, just in case you ever need access to the business account. I'd filled out a transfer request for $50,000 to my personal checking account. And then the system had told me that the account was frozen, that transfers could not be processed, and I should contact my bank for more information. Then the IRS agent had called. My parents' house looked exactly the same as it had looked since 1994, which was when they'd bought it. It was a nice house, 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, situated on 3 acres outside Seattle in a quiet neighborhood where neighbors gave you privacy. My dad's garage had been expanded at least twice, and it contained his hobbies, a vintage motorcycle that he restored obsessively, a woodworking setup that took up half the space, and various projects that he worked on during his downtime. He was in the garage when I arrived, standing in front of his workbench, looking like he hadn't slept in several days. His face had lines in it I didn't remember, or maybe they'd always been there and I just hadn't noticed. He looked smaller somehow. Diminished. "Hey," he said, and his voice was small too. "Hi," I said back. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, and I realized that I had no idea who this person was. I had a father, obviously. I had memories of childhood, of being taught to ride a bike, of being taken to baseball games and fishing trips. But I didn't have a real relationship with him. I had a relationship with the idea of him. I had a relationship with his checkbook. "The IRS investigation started about 14 months ago," he said, moving to sit on a stool by the workbench. "They sent me a notice. Very formal. Very official. They said they were going to audit the past 8 years of business records." "Why?" I asked. "Because I'd been underreporting income," he said. "For about 8 years. Ever since the construction business really took off, actually. After 2008, after the recession ended, everything started booming. I was doing 6, 7, 8-figure jobs. And I didn't want to give that much to taxes. So I got creative." He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "I paid contractors in cash," he continued. "I didn't file certain projects as income. I kept 2 sets of books, one for the IRS, one for myself. It's very common in construction. It's very stupid, obviously, but it's very common. I thought I was being smart. I thought I was beating the system. Turns out the system doesn't appreciate being beaten." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I was ashamed," he said simply. "And because I didn't think it would matter. I thought I'd settle with the IRS, pay some back taxes and penalties, and move on. I didn't think about what it would mean if my assets got frozen. I didn't think about what it would mean for you. I tried to withdraw $50,000, I said. From your account. I was going to use it to start a supplement company." My dad closed his eyes. "I know," he said. "The bank called me. They asked if I'd authorized the transfer. I said no. I said you were my son and you had access to my account from years ago, but I hadn't given you permission to withdraw money. And then they explained that the account was frozen anyway, so the transfer wouldn't have gone through. So I would have stolen it," I said. "If I'd known how to do it. I was going to steal $50,000 from you." "You didn't know the account was frozen," he said. "You thought there was $50,000 there to borrow. But the point is," he opened his eyes and looked directly at me, "I enabled you to think that. I made it so easy for you to just ask for money and assume it would be there that you never learned to actually work for anything. I made it so you never had to say no to yourself." I sat down on a box of supplies across from him. "How much do you owe?" I asked. "The IRS says $2.3 million, he said. "In back taxes, penalties, and interest. My attorney says we might be able to negotiate that down to $1.80 or $1.9 million. Either way, I'm going to lose the house. I'm going to lose most of my assets. I'm probably going to face criminal charges. The attorney thinks I can avoid prison time if we cooperate fully and I plead guilty. But everything else? Everything gets liquidated." "What about Mom?" I asked. "Your mother is protected," he said. "We're exploring every legal option to separate her assets from mine. But realistically, she's looking at starting over. She's going to have to find a job. She's going to have to rebuild." I felt something inside me crack. My mother had stopped working when I was born. She'd been a stay-at-home mom for my entire life. She was 58 years old. She had no recent work experience. She had no job skills that mattered in 2024. She was going to have to rebuild her entire life because my father had wanted to avoid paying taxes and I wanted to start a business that didn't actually exist yet. "I'm so sorry," I said. "You should be," my dad said, but there wasn't any anger in his voice. Just acceptance. "But you're not the problem. I'm the problem. I created a situation where you thought you could just take money whenever you needed it. That's on me. I failed as a parent the moment I decided that making sure you were comfortable was more important than making sure you understood that choices have consequences." The next morning, I met with my dad's attorney. His name was Richard Blackwell, and he worked for a firm that specialized in tax law and white-collar defense. He was the kind of man who wore a suit that cost more than my monthly rent, and he had an office on the 42nd floor of a downtown Seattle building with a view of the Sound. He explained the situation to both of us with the careful precision of someone who had this conversation 1,000 times before. Your father faces 3 categories of problem, Richard said, spreading papers across his desk like he was dealing a poker hand. First, the tax liability itself. The IRS has built a case based on his business records and banking data. It's pretty airtight. We're not going to win this case. We're going to negotiate. He tapped the first document. Second, the criminal liability. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division is involved, which means we're not just talking about civil penalties. We're talking about potential fraud charges, tax evasion charges, potentially money laundering charges if the prosecutor is feeling aggressive. Your father's cooperation will be important in determining how aggressive they want to be. He tapped the second document. Third, the asset liquidation. Once your father agrees to a payment plan, the IRS will place liens on his business, his real estate, his investments, essentially everything except what we can protect under Arizona homestead laws and federal bankruptcy law. We're looking at the sale of his home, his business, his investment properties. He'll walk away with almost nothing. How much can we protect? My dad asked. In Arizona, very little, Richard said. But you're in Washington. We have some options. We can put certain assets in your wife's name if we move quickly and can prove they her separate property. We can shelter a small amount through a retirement account. But realistically, you're looking at losing 95% of your assets. My dad nodded like he'd expected this. As for your son, Richard said, looking at me, the IRS agent was correct that he could potentially be charged with attempted theft or conspiracy. However, given that the transfer never actually went through, and given that he had legitimate access to the account with your knowledge, I think we can convince them that this was a misunderstanding. He needs to write a formal statement explaining that he thought he was borrowing money and that he wasn't aware the account was frozen. We'll submit that, and I think they'll decide he's not worth their time. I felt my chest relax slightly. But understand this, Richard continued, looking directly at me. Your father is about to lose everything. Your mother is about to lose everything. And you are about to lose the lifestyle you've been living. Your apartment in Portland? You won't be able to afford it. Your car? Probably going to have to go. Any financial support you've been receiving? Ending now. You're going to have to figure out how to support yourself in a way you never actually had to do before. I didn't say anything. This is actually going to be the best thing that ever happened to you, Richard said, and he said it not unkindly. You're going to learn that the world doesn't owe you anything. You're going to learn that you're actually capable of building something yourself. And you're going to grow up. Frankly, it's already overdue. 6 months later, I was living in a basement apartment in Seattle, working 2 jobs, and eating a lot of ramen. The first job was at a FedEx warehouse, where I was a package handler making $16 an hour. The second job was doing freelance writing for a content marketing agency, which paid anywhere from $15 to $50 per article depending on complexity. Combined, I was making about $3,200 a month, which was enough to pay my $800 rent, my car payment. I had kept the car because I needed it for work, and my food and utilities. I wasn't saving money. I was barely surviving. And I was happier than I'd ever been in my life. Not because poverty is fun, it's not. Not because working 2 jobs is glamorous, it's exhausting. But because for the first time in my life, I understood what I'd earned. Every dollar in my bank account was mine. I'd worked for it. I'd sacrificed for it. It meant something. My dad had taken a plea deal with the IRS. He owed $1.9 million, to be paid over 10 years. His business had been sold to pay the initial lump sum. Their house was on the market. My mom had gotten a job at a local community college as an administrative assistant, making $38,000 a year. She was exhausted all the time and absolutely glowing with pride because she was doing it on her own. My dad was working as a consultant for a construction firm, basically using his expertise to help other people build projects, making about $45,000 a year. It was a massive step down from running his own company, but he seemed at peace with it. He told me once that the guilt of having hidden the truth was worse than the actual consequences of the truth being discovered. Brandon, my cryptocurrency friend, had lost his money when the market crashed. He'd asked to borrow $500 to make rent. I'd said no. He wasn't my friend anymore after that, but I didn't feel bad about it. I was learning who I actually was when I couldn't just say, "My dad will pay for it." My supplement company idea had died the moment I realized I'd need to actually work for it. Turns out running a business is harder than reading LinkedIn articles about it. Who knew? On the 1-year anniversary of the IRS phone call, my dad asked if we could have coffee. We met at a local place in Seattle, nothing fancy, the kind of coffee shop where they knew your name if you came in regularly. My dad ordered a black coffee. I ordered the same. We sat at a small table by the window. "I want to apologize," he said, stirring his coffee even though he drinks it black and there was nothing to stir. "For a lot of things. For the tax evasion. For not telling you. For enabling you to avoid growing up. For putting your mother in a situation where she had to start over at 58 years old. For being a coward." "You don't have to apologize," I said. "Yes, I do," he said. "Because the thing I'm most sorry about is that if the IRS hadn't frozen that account, if I'd managed to hide all this for another 10 years, you would have become a completely different person. A worse person. You would have become someone who thought the world owed him things. Someone who couldn't handle not getting what he wanted. Someone like I was." He looked at me, and his eyes were different now. Clearer, somehow. More honest. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I'm proud that you've handled this with grace. I'm proud that you're working 2 jobs and not complaining about it. I'm proud that you grew up in about 6 months. That's the most important thing I could have done for you, even if it destroyed me to do it." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I just sat there drinking my black coffee with my father, and we didn't need to say anything else. 2 years later, I was working as a content manager at a tech company in Seattle, making $62,000 a year. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to pay my rent, save a little money, and live without constantly worrying about how I was going to cover my bills. My parents were doing okay. My dad had started a small consulting business from home and was slowly rebuilding his financial life. My mom was still working at the community college and had actually been promoted to department coordinator. They were renting a smaller house, something that would have been unthinkable to me 3 years ago but that now seemed perfectly reasonable. My dad called me one day and asked if I wanted to go to lunch. We went to that same coffee shop, and he brought an envelope. "This is $5,000, he said, handing it to me. "I want you to invest it in something. A business, an education, an investment account. Something that's going to grow. Not because I'm rescuing you. But because I believe in you, and I want you to have the opportunity to build something that's actually yours." I looked at the envelope, and I understood what he was really saying. He was saying that I'd proven myself. That I'd learned the lesson. That I could handle responsibility now. I didn't take the money that day. I told him I'd think about it. But a week later, I went back and asked him if the offer was still good. He said yes. And I took the $5,000 and opened a Roth IRA and started investing it systematically, month by month. It was the first real money I'd ever invested in my own future. And unlike everything else in my life, it was actually earned.